Hotels housing asylum seekers set on fire. Mosques and immigration centres targeted nationwide. Racist attacks.
They want to kill us.
A day of chaos and criminality.
6,000 police have been mobilised because of fears of more riots across the country.
What the? I literally leave the UK for 2 weeks and this is the shit that I come back to. A fucking race war? In case you've been living under like a rock, there's been huge waves of right-wing protests across the UK. These motherfuckers are out there like beating up immigrants. And literally, even the place I went for holiday, there are crazy political events happening. It's French elections today, and there's huge likeliness of riots happening. So hopefully I won't get shot here before I go to America. It'll be quite ironic.
Seemed poised to put its faith in the far right, suddenly changing direction. Instead, it is a left-wing coalition.
Take a look at what happened.
And you know, the funny thing is that all these people in these videos have one thing in common, which is that they hate people like me. Or, well, more like people that are different from them. The, whoa, immigrants. And after seeing all this stuff unfold, it really begged the question, how the fuck can you hate someone so much who you don't know anything about? Anything. You gotta be the biggest hater. Isn't it a praise that, oh, somebody wants to live where you live? And like, why is it always right-wing people that we associate with hating immigrants? So I'm dedicating this video to understand the different kind of drivers behind these tendencies of hating immigrants. I'll bring in my experiences and perspectives that I got from Paris and New York, and I'll also do some secondary research. This is a story that will definitely involve some financial inequality, disenfranchisement, woke and cancel culture, illegal immigration, and just a little sprinkle of racism. From there, we'll see how this right-wing politics work and get a better understanding of the perspectives of how people on the right think about immigration. And we'll do realize that on certain issues, they do have some point and needs to be taken validly. And most importantly, by looking into the anti-immigration trends and seeing its relationship to the right, we might be able to discover a bigger story that involves the general climate of our politics. Because if you think about it, they're literally undercover Nazis winning votes in Germany and France. And also American presidential candidates getting almost assassinated by some random school shooter looking virgin dodging the world's most lethal and well-prepared Secret Service forces. Like, make it make sense. So, by exploring the issue of anti-immigration, we might even find bigger issues that are concerning not just our well-being as immigrants, but something much bigger that could lead to the downfall of globalization and even our liberal democracies. Hey, yo. I think I have some good news to share. Basically, the last 2 weeks, I spent a lot of time digging through different kind of information, reading through articles, trying to understand the different kind of political situations a bit better. Went through various academic and research papers, trying to understand any kind of theoretical explanation of why certain things happen. I also explored different kind of statistics, trying to see if there's any kind of quantifiable things that I can show to you. I even went back to my uni's library just to see if there's any additional information that I can get my hands on. And well, I am no expert, but I think I am onto something. I actually found quite a lot of drivers behind these anti-immigration trends. For clarity, I tried to characterize them into 3 distinct categories, which we will talk about. But before we get to any of those, I think the best for us to do is first try to define and describe what the right is and who are these right-wing people. Let's check it out. Okay, so trying to define what left and right means is a super hard task. The meaning of these things, of what it means to be left and right wing, kind of changes so much throughout history. Or the fact that what makes you right or left kind of depends on geographic location as well. Also, the spectrum is quite multidimensional. I don't know if you guys seen any of those like 4x4 matrices of memes where one axis is economic and the other one is like political, left and right. That basically just shows that there's already a differentiation between what's like somewhat a political, like a social left and right, and what it means to be economically left and right. Are you now like a capitalist, nationalist, social justice warrior? Are you like a redistributionist socialist? There's so many ways of defining what it means to be on the left and the right. But does that mean that this whole video is basically just pointless because I don't know what the fuck the right is? Well, I am trying to go by what Yon found in the 2022 study. These ideas of what it means to be left and right always have some core ideology, and then the different other changing meanings that are around it, a more malleable thing that is defined always by its own cultural, historical historical context and also by geographic positioning. There's quite a lot of ideas out there in terms of defining what these core principles are, but I think one of the very thorough ones that I found, and at least what the academic space also claims that is quite thorough, is from this guy called Bobbio. So Bob thought that the biggest distinction between left and right is basically the attitudes towards equality, which somewhat makes sense because whenever we think about the left, it's always about the equality and the inclusivity of different kind of people. While on the other hand, the right wing thinks of the legitimacy of inequality in a very different way. They either categorize it as like some kind of a human nature thing, that there are just inherent differences between people, or some people might think that everybody starts from somewhat the same, but they progress differently through life because of different kind of individualistic achievements instead of some kind of a bigger structural issue. But I think there is an even better interpretation out there from a guy called Joshi, who made in his 2021 paper, where he defined a specific type of attitude towards a certain type of equality that defines what it means to be left and right. And this is around the equality and power. The way he described it is that while the left wants to deconcentrate power, on the other side, the right wants to concentrate power, and they do think that such kind of power is in the hands of those who deserve it. This does make sense because equality in itself is a very, very broad term. Both sides do aspire to a certain type of amount of equality. So, for example, even on the right, there is an aspiration towards equality in different kind of human rights or political rights for those people who they consider as someone who deserves such kind of treatment. But there's always some of an in-group and an out-group. So here, again, the question is more about the power difference between such in-groups and out-groups, and that's why I think power is probably one of the best ways of describing. So do keep that in mind, because I do think power will implicitly come around in every single one of the drivers that affects that current anti-immigration sentiment. So now we know what the right means, we should get into some of the nitty-gritty bit of things. The factors that cause the rise in anti-immigration sentiments can be broken down into three categories. These are social, economic, and political. And all these factors are not just some abstract theoretical stuff. These are very much real with tangible impact. Real things that I've seen or experienced throughout my trip in Paris and New York and throughout my life in London. And I'm pretty sure many of you out there have similar experiences wherever you live. What could be a better place than sitting in front of my casting couch talking about security? Security is probably one of the most important themes that is being discussed across different kind of right-wing channels, because whenever migrants or immigrants are being talked about, they're somehow always associated with some security crisis. If we just think back to the big crises that have impacted the West in the last few years, like the war on terror, COVID, the huge migrant flow into Europe in 2014, security has always been top of mind. The war on terror, obviously from its name, was all about terrorism, fighting Al-Qaeda, having revenge against the people who committed 9/11. Same thing with COVID, about health security. How the Chinese have brought a new kind of virus. Even if you think about the Stop Asian Hate in America, it was specifically against different kind of hate crimes committed against Asians because they were thought of as the agents of bringing this whole global pandemic onto people. Or if we just think back the migrant crisis in 2014, waves of Muslims are coming to Europe and they're gonna take our jobs, rape our women, they're going to change up the cultural mix of the country. So these themes across security, and especially the idea of securitization, has been one of the main things that have driven hate towards immigrants across the right. Securitization is basically this phenomenon where various kind of actors across a series of discourses constantly associate some kind of an issue as a security threat. Then slowly a paradigm is being created, and when these type of discourses start to spread and more people start to reinforce this idea and this connection between the two, that's when this moral justification of immigration being a security threat will be kind of created and being solidified. So put it more simply, people chat shit. The more people chat shit, the more you believe that shit is actually real, and the big collective slowly starts to manifest hate. But obviously, securitization is only the tip of the iceberg, because the reason why securitization discourses are so effective is that they involve one specific ingredient that makes it so easy to hate, which is racism. Race is basically being used as this base to tie the different kind of security discourses to. And race is so effective as a base because we basically socially construct different kind of attitudes and stereotypes across different kind of races, and then associating them with some kind of a security problem, such as illegal immigration or also just terrorism. So, for example, after 9/11, we always associate terrorists with Muslims. Even if you're the most liberal thinking, left-wing social justice warriors, it's quite likely that because of all the classic discourses around Muslims and terrorism, you will inherently some kind of subconsciously already tie them together. Or another example that I have there's more prevalent in America is that Mexicans are always being treated as somewhat illegal. And not just Mexicans, but Latinos in general, because how they look the same same as Mexicans. It's really just about these type of people are bundled together into this idea of them being illegal because there's some kind of biological trace that makes them somewhat similar. And often these are not only within the cultural sphere of what people are talking about, but sometimes even governments start to design different kind of policies that target these type of groups more because there's a higher likeliness that these people will be associated with the given crime. And these are usually very hostile and very serious. Like, I'm pretty sure everybody who went through TSA once in their life, especially if they're a minority, they'll be scared to shit. I was even scared and I had nothing to hide. I was literally stopped and had to be brought to like a separate white room just to check my passport again. And even crazier sighting in New York, when I was going from the LaGuardia airport back into the city, I see like 5 or 6 NYPD officers manhandling this like skinny ass kid, presumably Latino. I don't know what he'd done. I'm not gonna say he's innocent, but I'm pretty sure you don't need 6 weaponized men to actually handle him. And just knowing that how many Muslims are usually being stopped at the American border just to check if they are associated with any kind of terrorist activity just shows me that there is already that mental association, even manifesting within law and migration policies that connect a certain racial group with a given criminal activity. And the ironic part is that while these type of groups are usually thought of as some kind of a security issue, in reality, they're the ones who are actually facing different kind of challenges in terms of their own personal security. They'll be more scrutinized across the borders, there will be more police, more surveilled, and they have to face different kind of challenges around deportation. Different kind of supremacist groups are targeting these people, trying to literally kill them just because they exist. And the reason why race is so effective in creating this association between immigration and security is because race is a huge paradigm created throughout history, a history of colonialism and racial segregation. You can still see a lot of cases that reminds us of the remnants of the racial past. For example, in Paris, I went to an Algerian market, which was considered in to be the areas which are really rough or unsafe. And coincidentally, these areas were all filled with different kind of North African minorities and immigrants. And the saddest thing that I seen was this night in Brooklyn when I got lost, where I was getting into more and more weirder and also more rougher areas. And sadly, the demographic mix of people slowly shifted towards darker skin tones and skin colors, showing that there's still a de facto racial segregation or just racial separation between areas within the city. And this is not just unique to New York, but many other cities with very diverse populations. And all of us think in this context. And even if you're the wokest motherfucker, I don't believe you that you don't think in the racial ways. It's so embedded nowadays in our society to think of different kind of groups of people based on biological traits, because at the end of the day, race is socially constructed, but it has tangible real life impact. And even if you try to make an a-racial way of looking into the world, the different kind of inequalities and disadvantages and discrimination are not going to disappear. The system is already built on these type of notions. How we view ourselves as individuals and identities are also so tied to a racialized idea of ourselves. So far we can see an explanation within how securitization and associated racism can help drive hatred towards immigrants on the right. But there's still one more element having the same ideological power as racism, which is nationalism. It seems like that in our world of globalization, nationalism is getting more and more irrelevant. But just seeing the political developments of the last few years, we can clearly tell that nationalism is still here to stay. It's based on an amalgamation of countries' history, culture, political and social systems, language, and so many more. And all these elements that nations basically aggregate into one holds a lot of identity value. Basically just means that the way you think about yourself will be so much associated with these different kind of elements. For example, I'm Asian, I'm Chinese, and I really cherish the Chinese historical and cultural heritage that my parents have passed down to me. However, I grew up in Hungary, so I never got the full package of that, but I also received a lot about the Hungarian cultural context, and those two things both shape who I am and how I think about myself. And just depending on the degree of how much do you associate yourself and your identity with those different kind of elements that define who is part of the nation, that basically determines how much you are likely to be nationally attached. This national attachment basically provides you this sense of national belonging that creates this whole imagined community that you're all part of. Because the thing is, national attachment and nationalism is not necessarily going to be toxic and hostile. You can be patriotic and loving your country without trying to attack other foreigners and other people from other countries. These really extremist sentiments are usually stemming from what Verkuiten in their 2022 paper called national narcissism. The people who are nationally narcissistic, it's not just about the love of your country, but it's also about you being better than others. When you start building out these different kind of hierarchies between nations, that's when you start being intolerable towards outsiders. And now we can see that nationalism also changed into about what we said about securitization and racism. the historical development of nations, colonialism, and racial segregation basically created this idea that certain cultural elements make up a certain nation, and you associate your identity with being part of that nation. This ties then into this paradigm of racist thinking when you start building hierarchies between different kind of racial groups that sometimes are also associated with national groupings, with which you start building out this idea of like you versus them. And when discourses starts to form, either from a state-led point of view or from different kind of political parties like right-wing parties, telling you that there are different kind of foreigners who are other than you, who are bringing some kind of security threat to your country, to your nation, and these people also racialized in a given way, that's when you're easily mobilized people. Well, this literally just sparks some new questions. We do live in this national and racial paradigm, but not every right-wing person wants to fucking obliterate like every single immigrant from the surface of this world. So what makes certain people more susceptible than others? We have already touched upon it, but what is the role of institutions, political parties, influential figures in shaping these susceptibilities of hating immigrants? And this is where we come to our next sections of economic and political factors. So let's roll the transition footage. I hope my yapping so far makes sense because we're getting into the deep end right now. If you agree or you just like the new format of these videos, then please subscribe. Currently in the Shanghai Pudong airport, there's gonna be some Chinese content going your way as well, so another reason to subscribe. And if you don't like the video format or you just think like this mix of like vlogging / video essays so far doesn't make too much sense, please comment down there how can I make it better, because this is the new direction I want to take my channel to. And also if you just disagree or there are certain points that you want to raise, please also comment down there. I'm very much open for a civilized reason and also just a not hatred driven like debate. So thank you for sticking around. Let's just go back to the economic factors. All right, let's talk about the economy, shall we? We're going to talk a lot about one of my favorite things in this world. Capitalism. Well, capitalism feels like this ever-present force that basically shapes everything in terms of how the economy is being run to like how we create value within society. There's still a lot of difference between what type of model do we choose for capitalism. For long, after the post-war period, Keynesian economics, especially in the West, was the most prevalent model that called for the involvement of the state within economic matters. So this meant more government intervention, a lot of government spending, trying to keep unemployment really, really low, while still promoting economic growth through fiscal measures. And this was a perfect model for the heavily industrialized in countries across the West, especially after Second World War. America, there was a seismic shift in the 1970s. There was a lot of issues. There was stagflation, oil crises, rising public debt, and fiscal deficits, which was undermining all the premises of the Keynesian economic model. And on top of that, a new intellectual shift has happened within economics towards neoclassical ideas. And this paired with the increasing globalization in the world, a new political shift happened where a new economic world order was shaped by the most prominent leaders such as Ronald Reagan in America.
Welcome them into a great national crusade to make America great again.
And Margaret Thatcher in the UK.
Be individuals. And we believe that everyone has the right to be unequal, but to us, every human being is equally important.
This new world order was called neoliberalism. And one of the most important principles they had is that the markets correct themselves and they only need the state to secure law and order and facilitate market activities. However, intervention is not desired because they're always going to be politically biased and frankly very incompetent moves. This was one of the main premises. And from there, a new wave of different kind of changes happened where privatization was more important, loosening up different kind of labor regulations and making the labor market much more flexible. In the midst of all the globalization and like business opening up across the world, neoliberalism, I guess, was perfect for that time period to kind of reshape people's minds as thinking of themselves as like some kind of an individual who has agency over their lives than being part of some kind of a class-based or religion-based community. Social solidarity and political identities have slowly weakened and more people became disinterested in politics. The question of welfare became much more of a personal matter instead of a public affair one. Also, because of these developments, there's no different kind of social categories that political parties try to aim and capture. Instead, political parties started to open up their narratives and political campaigns, targeting a large variety of opinions. People started to feel like no politicians actually tried to cater to them. And that's how slowly a gradual distrust with the elite politicians have happened among the population. So basically, neoliberalism had let loose the market and helped people to think about much more about themselves instead of some collective bullshit and politics. Which sounds actually not too bad, right? Sadly not. And this is basically because 2008 rolled around. And we all know what happened in 2008. Or if you don't, you can just watch the film Big Short. There was a massive housing crisis starting in the US that basically went across the world. And the reason why it happened is because a lot of bankers fucked up. If money is evil, then debt building is hell. It's the most obnoxious group of money-hungry
low IQ, high energy, jackrabbit, fucking wannabe, big time, small time, shit talking, bothersome, irritating bunch of motherfuckers I have ever had to endure for more than 5 minutes.
Long story short, they're selling loads of dog shit financial products on different kind of houses, aka mortgages. And when the housing bubble bursted and homeowners started to default on these different kind of loans, all these banks got fucked up because they were holding a lot of loans that nobody can pay back anymore. And that's when they needed some bailout. And this basically just showed that there's a small slim layer of financial elites who literally can crumble economies because they just sometimes make shitty decisions. I wouldn't even say it's all their fault, because the problem is there's a systematic issue where these kind of behaviors are incentivized. After 2008, all the big principles of neoliberalism started to be questioned because even 2008, there was a huge government intervention. The too big to fail effect started to happen, where taxpayer money was thrown into these banks and keep the economy running, because if that wouldn't have been the case, we would have even suffered even more. And basically just creates this paradox where the markets are supposed to correct themselves, but now you need government intervention to make sure that the markets function well. Do you see the problem there? And this time, shit hit the fan so hard that even regular people started caught on what is going on. They realized that the elites are in their own sphere doing different kind of things, either if they're in political or financial elites. And somehow at the end, it's always the regular people who are getting fucked. So the flaws of the system really started to show. Neoliberalism increased inequality and further widened the gap between the elites and the regular people. And you could say, why is it a problem? Because people just did well and they made money for themselves. It's very fair if you think about it this way. How these are the issues that are endangering our current globalized world order and our liberal democracies. And if our globalization breaks down, business opportunities start to dry up. And if that is paired with an erosion of liberal democracy, all the different rights and laws that govern our markets and help us to have somewhat of an equal competition and just opportunities for creating extra value and bringing new businesses to this world basically start to disappear. And then you will see an even more corrupt elite sphere of people that will slowly monopolize the entire market and take away all the opportunities that you could get your hands on. So by focusing on solving inequality and also focusing on the widening gap between the elites and the people is also very much in the interest of even capitalists. Okay, after all of this, you might be asking, Lin, what the fuck are you on? Why are you talking about inequality when the topic is about anti-immigration? Where's the connection? And isn't inequality more of the thing that the left focuses on? What the fuck the right has to do with this? But yo, just let me cook, okay? Just to emphasize the inequality point, let me just show you guys some stats. First, one of the most used sources from Thomas Piketty is this French guy who wrote like fat books around inequality. Found out the national income share of the top 1% has been increasing the last decades. He particularly highlighted executive compensations have fucking skyrocketed, and the gap between average worker salaries and what compensation do executives get is crazier and crazier. And with these tendencies of increasing income inequality, we have returned to levels that we have not seen since the early 20th century, where we are favoring capital more than actual labor. And to show you more statistics about the countries that I went for holiday to or just been living in, let's just go through that. So how much wealth inequality is there in the US? Well, the top 10% of households by wealth had $6.9 million on average. As a group, they held 67% of total household wealth, and the bottom 50% of households by wealth had 51K on average. As a group, they had only 2.5% of total household wealth. We can clearly see there's a big difference. Now let's go to Paris, France. The wealthiest 10% of households own 47% of all household wealth in 2021 versus 41% in 2010. And my dear country, the United Kingdom, the Gini coefficient, which basically measures inequality, increased from 34.4% in 2021 to 36.5% in 2022. So we can see across all these big economies, inequality has just been rising. And when 2008 happened and revealed all the different flaws of neoliberalism, collective political thinking got revitalized. A lot of people started to slowly shift away again from the very individualistic way of thinking, because they started to realize that as public scrutiny starts to disappear, private interest started to seep into the public sphere, creating different kind of decisions that are not favoring the public itself, but more the financial elite. So obviously the left shines in this area. There are different kind of leftist movements like the We Are the 99% that happened straight after 2008. They marched to Wall Street, calling out financiers and everyone who were involved with this absolute shit fuckery of the economy. The left mostly focused on showing that inequality is created by the various type of elites elites, and they're benefiting off from the general public, and also emphasizing the importance of redistribution. But the right also had to find their own response to the macroeconomic issues that's been going on, because they wanted to also capture the support of those people who has been slowly fucked throughout the years of neoliberalism, and who have also realized their own political worth after 2008. The right tried to show how the elites are related to other external agents, and that's where migrants come in. And not just migrants, but also the idea of nation. Because many times when we hear right-wing arguments against the establishment or just elite-led institutions, it's always either about these guys trying to globalize the world and bring in migration and allow different kind of foreigners into the country who are not deserving enough. That's why we need to focus more on our borders, in preserving our own country and its integrity, and make our country great again. I think you definitely have heard that before. Or the other way around, usually in the European Union, a lot of right-wing narrative usually associates the elite with the EU or any kind of other bigger global international organization. In these cases, they usually say that these international organizations that were not picked by the general population of that given nation are basically giving orders and directing how a country should act. And in order to protect one's national sovereignty, we need to fight back. And then all these narratives, obviously, in many times different kind of contexts, start to get more colorful. For example, pointing towards that countries are opening up their borders, allowing different kind of peoples in that will basically press down labor wages for the native population. Foreign capital comes in, exploits everything, and then leaves without giving anything back to the country. And hard-earned taxpayer money is basically being spent on migrants or letting in immigrants. Larger, bigger international organizations not being competent enough in terms of making decisions. For example, having unified economic policies through the European Union, Eurosceptics start to question what impact does these type of decisions have on their own country's economies. A great example is the Greek financial crisis. And the best ones are usually the ones that are connecting the elite with the political opponents, usually liberals or left-wing parties. While I'm putting these points in the most extreme, surreal ways, these guys do have a point, because all these issues are definitely legitimate. While not immigrants themselves, but foreign competition does presses down wages, due to the fact that big companies don't want to produce in local environments if they can do it much cheaper in fucking China, Vietnam, Bangladesh. And ever since then, the right has been really successful in creating these narratives and pinpointing those pain points that people have been having with the neoliberal system. We could even see it during COVID and our current post-COVID economies. With our current high inflation, high interest rate environments, cost of living crisis, a lot of people's lives are being destroyed. And they can point to those elites in the establishment who are creating the current monetary and fiscal policies, and they blame them as being fucking incompetent. And I'm not even going to argue that they're or not, but they can really create this narrative around them, which further fuels this distrust towards the elite. Same with COVID. COVID was either a racial thing, or slowly it started to become more of a question of the establishment taking away your personal freedom. And they basically put you under surveillance while also mandating you to be vaccinated, basically putting something into your body which you really didn't have a choice of choosing or not choosing. And while I am fully in support of the vaccination program, I can see the point of the other side, because they felt personally being attacked due to the fact that some of their basic human rights and political rights have been taken away. And when they see the so-called left or liberals are taking away these rights that they feel full entitlement to, that's when they start flocking to the other side. Okay, I think I'm getting a bit too ahead of myself. Started to talk about a bit too much about politics. But the main takeaway from this section is that neoliberalism created a new economic world order where the financial elites are favored the most, who also get most of the help from the state and the political elite, and due to which people first started to not care about politics, thinking about just their own individual well-being, but slowly realized that their own individual well-being is pretty much dependent on how these elites govern the economy and what they do to the economy. And when the economy got ruined by just a slim group of people, they started to get fed up, regain their political consciousness, realize the issues of inequality and the widening gap between the elites and the general population. They now wanted to get accountability and control back, which then led to two directions where different kind of leftist narratives have captured a certain groups of people, and the rightist narrative started to capture another group of people that involves the defense of the nation against different international organizations or external forces such as immigrants. And when people are in vulnerable positions feel like they didn't commit anything to get into that miserable life that they are currently in, or their voice is not being heard and the elite are basically playing them, they will start to look for answers. And this is when the national narcissistic tendencies and also the racial paradigm that we've been living under starts to kick in. And if you add a little bit of that securitization of immigrants and colored people in general, you get the perfect mix of mobilizing a group of people who have right-leaning tendencies or very much were already dedicated to the right. And migrants have become one of the main platforms that are being blamed for issues within the economy. As I got into a lot of things about politics itself, you can clearly see that just looking into the economy doesn't tell the full story. We do need to talk about politics. And why right-wing solutions to the issues of the economy took off, became legitimate, and for many even more popular and reasonable than leftist solutions. To talk about the political drivers of why there's a rise in anti-immigration sentiment, we're basically merging the takeaways of all the things that we discussed about racism and this gap between the elite and the people. Seeing the political drivers behind anti-immigration is very, very crucial. Since there's so many right-wing parties that have been calling against immigration, and these guys are winning votes in political elections. For example, recently, AfD in one of the states in Germany received the most votes. So these guys are proper electoral competitors. So our story behind how politics relates to the hatred of immigrants starts in the 1980s. This was the time when different kind of identity-related themes started to get politicized, such as race, gender, sexuality. These were new types of social movements that were new terrains for political forces to get a foothold. So whoever was able to capture the people's minds and show themselves as representative of their struggles basically could have established a new ideological paradigm where the way how they tackle identity-related issues could be through their own political perspectives. For example, if the left captured this field, they would have tried to disperse power and create more of a power equality through inclusivity and just involving all these different social movements into the power structure. So among the political and intellectual elite, these liberal values infused with the progressive left started to take over and I guess became somewhat of a mainstream narrative where the inclusivity of different kind of racial, sexual, and gender groups has to be considered to create a more open society where everybody has a stake and everybody has rights. And this was a great step ahead for humanity. However, in anything, there's always extremities. And this also applies to the left. The so-called progressive far left started to push this agenda of sharing power with oppressed communities and minorities to a more radical front. And I think this is what the right had issues with. What I'm talking about is something that all of us know through social media, which is cancel culture and wokeism. In this new age of politics, when identities basically started to become political factors, aka the so-called identity politics was formed, wokeism became one of the most extreme political ideologies that were based in identity politics. The issue is with wokeism nowadays that it's not really fighting for equalizing these identities with the ones that are already in power, but it privileges them through methods of value signaling and victimization. So basically they try to favor them without actually integrating them. This is a point by Gill from his 2022 paper. It's a super controversial one and very radical. I don't agree with all the pieces and points, however this one should be discussed. So basically what it tried to do is not putting them on par with the current power structure and basically merging them into one integrated unified form. Instead, they just want to over push them and just make them the new elite, which obviously creates a lot of issues already with the fact that whoever you overtook won't be happy with being overtaken. The way how it does it is by using victimhood, by exploiting wounds that are tied to different kind of oppressive life experiences. Instead of healing these problems and finding the solutions that allow these people to be part of the current power structure, they using this trauma more as a weapon against the oppressors to try to destroy them. And victimhood establishes this moral status for these type of people through which they are able to morally signal towards anyone who don't agree with them. And this leads to our current day most controversial effect, which is cancel culture, that leads to a very, very divided society, endangering even our liberal democracy. Cancel culture is basically the epitome of identity politics, where there are certain opinions and ideas around how we should break the oppressive cycle of different minorities, and it just takes it as absolute truth without any kind of possibility for public discourse and openness towards the opinions of others. And it takes many things as granted. For example, the idea that gender inequality is just a thing, gender pay gap is just a thing, patriarchy exists, heteronormativity exists, and that there are so many unjust structures across the world that we need to strongly fight against. And before you start canceling me, I'm not saying I don't believe in these. They're very, very much real. Here the question is more about how do you communicate these and how open are you for discussion with any of those who might question your worldview? Because what cancel culture does is that whenever there is a contrarian opinion opinion towards whatever you believe in, instead of hearing them out and trying to debunk the different kind of differences, you start moralizing them through a moral high ground. And when this respect towards the other doesn't formulate, in fact, you put yourself higher above them, that's when effective communication and open discourse between the two breaks. And when you slowly become the majority of people who think that whatever the left and the liberals propose is the absolute truth, other opinions will become the minorities. And in a minority position, they will feel existentially threatened, which creates further divide in society. For example, in Gibson and Sutherland's 2023 paper, a lot of conservatives reported that they felt they had to self-censor themselves more than liberals because of fearing being cancelled. Norris, in his 2021 paper, also found this tendency towards self-censorship on academic campuses, basically hindering academic freedom because intolerance towards contrarians is increasing. There's a solidified group thinking that is established, and anyone who doesn't think in the same way basically are being stifled, creating less intellectual debate and diversity of thought. And this is a very dangerous trend where we start to shift away from open intellectual debate. That's one of the most important bases of how democracy should work. And we're getting into the space of ideological, identity-based tribalism, where there's just different kind of diverse narratives that are trying to compete for the same space of truth. But moral posturing becomes more important than fact-based arguments, and the identity of the person who says those arguments become much more important and morally right, and not the argument itself. And all those people who started to hate the radical left started to find the right-wing approach much more attractive, because what the right offered was a rescue of people away from the overly liberalizing decay that was going on the left, and more importantly, they offered the restoration of morality that a lot of people lost due to the fact of wokeism and cancel culture, while more positioning and moral high ground was given to the previously oppressed. And slowly those people were not represented by the left started to feel like the same way as the people they were oppressing before. How the tables have turned, huh? And now I'm not speaking on if they're actually being oppressed or not, or if positive discrimination that the left does is actually bringing these minorities above than the rest. What I'm trying to say is that there is a certain segment and groups of people who started to feel that they are now getting more marginalized, and that's how they started to get closer to the right. So the right basically started to normalize whatever the left was trying to claim as super important, and claiming them to be deviant activities. They said the public moral code got relaxed. They had issues with certain sexual behaviors getting more and more tolerated, different kind of taboos getting lifted, previously lower status, different minorities, colored people getting more and more rights. And here's where immigration also comes in. They had issues that immigration was encouraged, that eroded the moral community that was embedded in the traditional ideas of family, religion, and the native local ways of living. So very simply put, anti-immigration is basically one of the ways how the right is fighting against the political agendas of the left. And it is part of a much bigger picture of the erosion of open debate, intellectual thought, and diversity of thought, and really just the liberal values associated with our democracies. And before we close off the politics-related stuff, I still have to talk about populism, because it has been one of the most important factors in creating these extreme narratives that is polarizing the right and the left. Populism is defined in many, many ways, either as a practice, an ideology, but I usually go with Robert Jensen's way of putting it. It's a tool for political mobilization and for beautiful rhetoric. Because this tool can be used by both the right and the left to radicalize and call its people for political action. And this mobilization and rhetoric always involves the juxtaposition of a certain group of people against the elites. Studies from Stotzer et al. And Posey et al. Show that income inequality is very much tied to the success of populist parties, because populism thrives on the narrative of people versus the elite. And what neoliberalism has caused is this increasing gap between the elite and the people, which meant that deploying this tool to highlight this difference was a really good way of mobilizing the general mass for some kind of political action. Political action meaning going to the polls and voting for those leaders who are supposedly representing them. And this highlighting happened in many ways, as I already said, either through like saying, fuck the EU, these immigrants don't deserve to be in my country, they're taking away my jobs, and these guys are working with leftist elites who are trying to put them into our country. All these different kind of international liberal forces are trying to destroy our own public code of morality. They're trying to make our societies more deviant, etc., etc., etc. people who hate the leftist arguments, don't agree with the wokeist, cancel culture type of ideologies, who has been fucked over by neoliberalism, and who just recently regained political consciousness, they finally feel represented. However, this representation is not really real, because usually through this type of political support, a new type of establishment is being formed with same type of political elites, those type of strongmen who are able to pose themselves and use the populist rhetoric as if they are part of the people. Because you cannot tell me that people like Donald Trump or Marine Le Pen are not part of the elite, but they really sell the idea amazingly. And sadly, these people divide our societies even more. Polarized people who already have an identity-based hatred towards others. And when populists start to radicalize these things, pit them against each other, that's how polarization starts to form, which is perfect for them because they can get foothold at the political big boy table where they can make decisions, where they can strengthen their own positions, their own political power, destroying the principles of liberal democracies, such as the rule of law, the importance of democratic institutions, and also just simply open debate. And so through that, they can start influencing migration policy, closing off borders, making the process of getting visas harder, securitizing certain minorities as illegal, creating more mercantilist economic policies, reversing the progress with globalization. And these populist narratives are even getting stronger through social media, pushing the type of content that one wants to see. I'm not going to get into the social media rabbit hole because it's going to be even more things. We can leave that to the next video. So for anyone who cherishes liberal democracies and a globalized world, the rising anti-immigration and the broader issue that it brings should be very, very serious and very, very concerning. We are worryingly getting more polarized nowadays, especially in times when the left and the right are both proposing very valid and very important questions that we as humanity together have to tackle. For example, I witnessed so much domestic problems, both in France and America, where a common consensus between both sides of the political spectrum is needed. Both in Paris and New York, it's so clear how big the difference is between the rich and the poor. Like in the city center of Paris, you all have these big luxury conglomerates providing the world's richest people of the best products ever. And even the Paris Olympics is happening, like every single big celebrity, the elites of the world are basically in town to enjoy these type of sporting events. But those people who are actually living there, some people even left because they don't want to be around during the Paris Olympics. And there's so much money being put into rebuilding the entire city, making it much harder for locals to move around and get around the city, and also just disturbing their daily lives. Also shows that there's this discrepancy between what the elite wants and what the locals want. And we don't even have to talk about America. There's a huge drug problem, homelessness problem, and the mix of those, the amount of like fentanyl fed like zombie homeless people on the streets were just so saddening for me to see. The cost of living crisis, especially in New York, nothing is affordable. Oh, and obviously gun violence. It's such a classically American thing for me to see these type of signs that says that certain zones are like gun-free zones. And I'm pretty sure nobody fucking gives a fuck about those signs. And also just American infrastructure. Looking at the subway, apparently the New York subway is the top of the game of what type of public transport system you can have in America. That's one of the most appalling things I've seen, because that shit was trash. And just imagining the fact that there's nothing even better across this country that we call like the biggest power on earth was just so eye-opening. And that's when the question comes as well, like the distrust of where do public funds go if not into these like public services that people all need. And this is how slowly you lose trust with your population, because you start feeling that people in the elites are all doing their own corrupt game and nobody really cares about your life. But of course, in both of these countries, seeing the root causes of these problems is so hard and not clear, because it's definitely easier to blame the random colored person than trying to change the entire system and revamp the status quo. And the funniest thing is, immigrants are actually useful for the economy. They bring economic prosperity. Let me tell you how. So I'm looking at this study from Kozan et al. From 2021. They were observing through an extensive empirical study, how does international migration flows impact the receiving country's economy? And what they found is that their impact on wages is almost zero, or sometimes even positive for the locals. Here's why. So first of all, immigrants are usually taking the shit jobs. They're not taking away your fucking fancy ass job, whatever, in the office. Most of these immigrants sometimes come to the country to take the lower paid jobs that nobody wanna fucking do, or complementary jobs where there's some kind of a skill gap that they fill in. Immigrants are usually competing with other immigrants because they're kind of looking for the same type of positions to fill in. Second, which is quite obvious, with more people, there's more demand. These guys come here, they consume, they invest into the local economy. So they boost the local economy and also producing different goods for the economy. Third, when there's a huger immigration inflow, companies usually want to go to those locations because they know that there's going to be more consumers for their given product. So there's going to be more local investment. And fourth, there's a large proportion of immigrants who turn out to be entrepreneurs making and creating extra value for a given country. For example, Vander and Frank in 2016 reported that immigrants represent 27.5% of the country's entrepreneurs, but only around 13% of the population in the United States. So you can see that immigrants don't necessarily count as a negative factor. In fact, sometimes they come out pretty much net positive for a given country. And obviously this is also country and context dependent of how an economy functions in a given country. Still, even if there has been some short-term wage decreases due to immigration, on the longer term, they provide more value for society in that given country. And just before you start saying anything about these immigrants being criminals and raping our women and doing crazy shit, bringing in drugs, let me also give you a new perspective. Various studies try to find evidence if concentration of immigrants in a given area has actually impacted crime rates in that given place. For example, a study from 2022 by Baumelt and Merrill compiled unique datasets comprising more than 70 published studies across a variety of spatial and temporal scales between 1951 and 2016. Then they did show that an overall effect linking foreign-born populations to insecurity may exist. But there is little evidence for refugees or migrants consistently leading to more insecurity. Specifically, foreign-born populations are unlikely to be systematically related to terrorism and hate crimes, while they can be associated with a higher risk of state-based disputes, intergroup conflict, or one-sided violence. As you can see even from the study, I'm not saying that there is no linkage between foreign-born people and certain criminal activities, but you can certainly not make the direct connection between somebody being foreign-born to some certain extreme criminal activities. But you can see clearly that there are beef between immigrants and the state because maybe they're over-surveilled, and also intergroup violence, which basically is friendly fire. So you can see that the hatred towards immigrants is not as based as the right would like to think. However, they do lead to very serious and very legitimate questions. Even if you're leftist or liberal, these issues can only be solved if you work in conjunction with the right and hearing out their opinions without the tribalistic political drama that is currently going on in the world. Ultimately, governments need to design policies that focus on the root causes behind the issues of immigration. Emphasis should be on how you could control migration flows. And this could even be a global act in terms of helping different kind of countries where there's huge chaos and crises, where people want to leave their countries due to dire situations. If developing countries fear these people so much, they should rather invest more into developing those other countries so people have the necessary living conditions with which they do not need to flock into other countries. They also need to nurture a society to be much more open and inclusive of receiving others and happily integrate them. And there needs to be systems in place where the gradual integration of these outsiders could happen, which doesn't mean complete assimilation where everything of their past identities will be disappeared, but being conscious of those cultural backgrounds. I'm certain that you can find a balance. And I'm not posing these as some very, very simple questions, but these are the real questions that we're supposed to think about and try to solve instead of just labeling certain people as terrorists or criminal. Immigration is a beautiful thing. We never had such amount of possibilities of being able to expose to so many backgrounds and so many personal stories. Even just the fact that how much immigrants have contributed to local cuisines across these different Western countries such as France, UK, and the US is just simply mind-blowing. You can literally get one of the most top-notch Asian and Mexican food across New York. You can get the most delicate kebabs and fanciest Indian food across the streets of London. If you fancy some Italian but with a little twist, you can go to the Italian district in Boston. And I think everyone deserves the opportunity to see the wonders of the world. For example, to experience how amazing Paris is. Just soak in that beauty, the elegance, and that great vibes of the city. Experience how annoying it is to try to communicate with Parisians, and just see the whole package of what world-class cities like Paris can offer. In the same vein, people should dare to try, dream big, and go to America. You know, just go and chase opportunities. Go seek an education in these intellectual hubs that command respect like Harvard, MIT, and just soak in all this relentless optimism that America gives you. And there are just so many more different characteristics and beautiful things they can experience throughout the world. And I want to believe that the global dream is still alive, where the world is interconnected and it doesn't matter where you come from, you can end up always joining into a new type of human community, either be it a nation, a local community, a city, whatever. And I want to believe that the acceptance of foreigners or just foreigner-looking people in the future will not just be dependent on their talents of kicking a ball into nets during the Euros. And just on a personal note on immigration, one of the most beautiful things that touched me so much throughout my trips is that these friends that I visited that I have known for 8 years now, we're all spread across the world in different kind of corners of the globe, but we can still come together now into our new home that could be either Paris, London, or the entirety of America, and we can still just sit down together as if we met each other every single day since our graduation, and we can still talk about like the dumbest, stupidest things like back in high school as if nothing changed. And that's why I think it's so important to maintain openness and the global dream alive, so these deep human ties can still remain and, well, be unified once in a while.